In this video, I will explain how to convert files in PDF, image, docx, or HTML format to text via the Sharperlight Scheduler actions File to Text and OCR Image or PDF to Text. Then, I will demonstrate a method of using these in a task that reads a folder full of documents, writes them into a database, and moves them into a processed folder. First, we'll look at File to Text. The File to Text action is a scheduler action that reads a specified docx or HTML file, storing the resulting text as either a file or a scheduler task parameter. As usual, you can hover over the fields for more information, and you can select the boxes at the end to open a file explorer and to view the task parameters and query combination parameters. Lastly, we have the text match option. This option causes the action to raise a text match not found error if the resulting text doesn't contain both of these fields. Now we'll look at OCR, image, or PDF to text. As with file to text, you can have a source file, you can use text match, and you can output the result to a task parameter and/or file. The differences are that you can also use a URL or FTP address as the source, with the option to set the authentication. You can also override the auto content type and language detection, as well as choosing to save the result as JSON instead of text. This action also requires an API key to function. This action utilizes OCR space, an online OCR service that needs an account with an API key to be used. There is a free version available, but also paid versions if you find the free version too limiting. The first task that I'll demonstrate is the task that reads a folder full of Word documents, writes the data into a database, the Invoices table, of which there is a table formula here for ease of demonstrating the changes, and then moves the invoices into the processed folder. If we take a look at one of these invoices, we can see that it's fairly basic, with the data that we'll want to get being the company name, the invoice number, the date, the sales tax, and the total due. Now if we execute the scheduled task, we'll see that the files have all been moved into the processed folder, and if we refresh the workbook, we'll see that the data has all been added into the table. Similarly, the OCR image or PDF to text uses a folder full of PDFs, which are just the Word documents that you saw before, but saved as PDFs. Has the processed folder, just the same, and writes it to the same table. Now if we execute this, as you can see, all of the PDFs have been moved into the processed folder, and if we refresh the workbook, the records have all been added. Let's take a closer look at the file to text example. The first thing you should do is give it a unique and meaningful code, as well as give the task a group. Make sure that the task is enabled, and if you wish, set a description, comments, and version number. This is usually a good idea. Make sure that you add your name as the author. After this, there are a few things to set. There's the default folder location, which is the location of all of the Word documents. And then there are three parameters to create. The invoice folder, which is the same as the default folder location. The temporary CSV file location, which will be used to store a temporary CSV file of all of the aggregated data. And an empty parameter called result, which will be used to store the text from the file to text action. After this, you have to create a few actions. The first one is a file delete with ignore errors. What this will do is it will clean up the temporary CSV file if you chose not to delete it at the end, or if something went wrong. After this, we have a query combinations. The first thing you'll want to do is edit the query, and make sure it's a summary report, of the product system and the table file list. Set the folder to the Word document folder, although this will be overwritten by one of the query parameters. Set subfolders to no and set file name to .docx. You'll need to make sure that you add file name as a filter through dragging file name from the selection pane into the filters pane. After this, you'll want to add file name and file path as outputs, again by dragging them from selection into outputs. After this, we'll log a message for debugging purposes so that we can see what's going on while the task is executing. Then we have the file to text action. As the source file, we're using the query combinations parameter file path, and we're using a text match on the words invoice and total. Remember, these are case insensitive. After this, we're outputting the text in two ways. For debugging purposes, we're saving it as a text file with the temporary CSV file location and the file name appended to that with the .txt extension. But the important part is that we're saving it to the parameter result. After this, we have some JavaScript. This JavaScript can be broken into three sections. First, we have the helper functions at the start. These are used to clean the text that we get, doing things like removing white space, quote protection, removing commas, and removing currency symbols. Then we have the section where we're extracting the data that we want from the text. First, we're declaring the variable result and assigning the parameter result to it. It is also possible to read the generated text file using that line of code. Now, because of the way that the file to text action interprets Word documents, for some of the data, we're just able to read a line. Because of this, we split the data based on the new line character and save that as split lines. However, as we go further on in the text file, it increases the chance that the lines are out of sync. For this, we'll want to look for headers and get the line underneath it. That's what this segment of code does. It searches for the lines with total due and sales tax, finding the lines with total due and sales tax. After this, we get all of the data that we want, and we create a new variable, content, and set it to a CSV file line using the data that we have, and a carriage return at the end. After this, we have some logs. We create a variable called directory and declare it as the temporary CSV file. And finally, we append the content to the CSV file. After this, we simply move the file to the processed folder, end the query combinations, and have a write back using the CSV file as a source, making sure that you have the task parameter of the temporary CSV file location, and finally, mapping the CSV file to the table using the column indexes. So to demonstrate this example again, as we execute it, we can see that it's looping through all of the files, it's using JavaScript to get the data from it, and moving it to processed, and then it's writing back the aggregated result. Now we'll take a closer look at the OCR image or PDF to text example. Again, we're setting the code, the group, we're making sure it's enabled, we can set the description, we can set the comments, and we can set the version. Again, make sure that you write your name as the author, and that you set the default folder location to the folder with all of the invoices. We're again creating three parameters, one of them with the PDF folder, one of them for the temporary CSV file, and an empty one for the result of the OCR action. Again, we started off with the file delete, making sure ignore errors is checked. This will delete the temporary CSV file if it wasn't deleted last time. After this, we have a query combinations, where you go edit query, and make sure it's a summary report of the product system and the table file list. Make sure that the folder is the PDF folder, or this will be overwritten in the query parameters, and set subfolders to no. Make the file name greater than or equal to PDF. In query parameters, override folder with the task parameter of PDF folder. We then log a message of the file path saying that we're loading it to help with debugging if anything goes wrong. After this, we have the OCR image or PDF to text action. We're using the source as a file, using the query combination parameter file path, and we're setting the content type to PDF, although auto would do just as well. After this, we have the OCR image or PDF to text action. We're using a file as the source, with the file path being the query combinations parameter, and we're setting the content type to PDF, although auto would do just as well, and we're setting the language to auto. I do have an API key, but for the purpose of security I haven't put it in here. And we're using text match on invoice and total, using a text file for debugging, as well as the task parameter result. This is the important one. After this, we have some JavaScript. This JavaScript is very similar to the previous JavaScript, with the helper functions cleaning the data and making sure that Sharperlight can read it when it's in the CSV file, as well as quote protecting it, cleaning white space, things like that. We're creating the variable result and assigning the parameter result to it, although it is possible to get the result from the text file. The next section is searching for the desired items in the invoice. This time, instead of using the line number, we're simply finding the text between two strings. So for example, with the total due, the amount, we're simply looking for the text between total due and the end of the line. After this, we create the line that will be entered into the CSV file, creating a variable called content and assigning that to it. After this, we log a message saying the line, create a variable called directory and set the CSV file to it. We append content to the directory. After this, we move the file at the query combinations parameter file path to the processed folder. We then end the loop and write back the CSV file at the temporary CSV file location to the table using column index mapping. Once this is all done, we delete the temporary CSV file, making sure that ignore errors is not checked. So again, to demonstrate this, once we execute the task, we can see that the PDFs have been moved into the processed folder, and if we refresh the table, we can see that it's been entered into the database. So to conclude, we've looked at the file to text action, we've looked at the OCR image or PDF to text action, and we've looked at practical examples implementing both of these. Thank you for listening.